Hello everyone. As I'm sure a lot of you are aware, there's plenty of rumors regarding upcoming PS5 games, and the thing is, whether you follow news here or somewhere else on your own free time, it's difficult to keep up with this stuff. Certain rumors, certain details, what sounds real, what sounds fake, all that stuff, right? So consider this one particular video kind of your roundtable discussion that will bring you up to speed on all the current PS5 game rumors that we have so far. So first up would be Remedy Entertainment, the Control team, and for those that don't know, Remedy right now has 4 teams going, one of which is working with Smilegate on the single-player campaign for Crossfire X and Crossfire HD. Those are Microsoft titles. Another is doing 2 unannounced projects funded by Epic for console and PC. Then there's a team handling the co-op multiplayer project Vanguard. And then finally, the Control team. This is apparently one where Sony is involved in some way, working out, or they have worked out, some kind of exclusivity agreement. Now, we suspect this from a few different angles. The global XDev producer Claire Bromley has shared Remedy job listings on her LinkedIn, which by itself, that's not too unusual, but she has done this before on other externally developed PS Studio titles like Returnal and Sackboy Big Adventures, so if something's happening, well, this would line up accordingly. But we also saw 2 years ago there was a very public display of a good working relationship between Sony and Remedy, where Sony was visiting Remedy, and I believe Remedy was also visiting Sony Studios at the time as well. This was when we had rumors about a possible acquisition going on, but that was also something where we can look back and see clearly that's not true, but maybe this is where we have more perspective on what was actually happening, that Sony was evaluating working with Remedy on a full exclusive. Maybe the agreement was still being sorted out at the time, or what's also important to note is that once an external studio has accepted a contract from Sony Interactive Entertainment, that studio has full access of the resources that a first-party studio would have, and so maybe that was also what was going on there, where once Control was shipped on previous-gen hardware, let's say a deal was struck right away, or again, it was evaluated, but that's kind of what we're going off of. Another rumor that we have, and we've been following this one for quite a while now at this point, it's one that everybody wants, and we just had an update on it 2 weeks ago on LTPS, but it's a native PS5 port of Bloodborne with a potential PC release later too. Maybe it would be day and date, who knows? It's not entirely clear because nothing's clear about this. The sources have always been very shaky at best. This is one rumor that just doesn't seem to go away, meaning it's either a lot of wishful thinking amongst everybody talking about it and speculating, or it's more of an open secret and the timeline is just unclear as to when to expect it, how far along it actually is, or what it even really looks like. And, well, to really look back at all these rumors here, I mean, we've had murmurings for over a year now at this point, but as of recent, we actually had one Twitter user, Souls Hunt, point out that it is indeed coming. This user pointed out Final Fantasy Origins prior to the more publicized coverage, which there were a few places where you could have found out about this before it was highly publicized, but this is just another person where they could have either read it somewhere else or they do have somebody that would have had firsthand knowledge of it. Either way, we also had the Reset Era user Racepace, which we talked about 2 weeks ago. They said it's coming, but they haven't completed the vetting process on Reset Era. Further back, summer 2020, we had tweets from Casey Explosion, Wario64, Imran Khan, all hinting at it in some way, or you could try and pick up on that's what they were getting at, and that's the problem with the wishful thinking aspect of this, right? Who actually knows and who doesn't, because you've had a bunch of people say that it's coming, but then they kind of dial back and go, oh no, well it's just, I heard it from somewhere else, right? Or, oh, we should expect it, right? It's kind of natural to think that. So it seems like the game might still come later this year if it's a real thing, but we're hearing it more and more, and much like we see with other rumors, if they are very frequent, then you can kind of pick up on when something actually is coming, and it's more a matter of when, not if. It makes too much sense. We should be seeing this game at some point. Now, for this next one, this is a precautionary tale. It's very recent. It's about From Software, so this started with an apparent 4chan thread which claimed From Software's next project is a spiritual successor to Bloodborne with the codename Velvet Veil, and that it would be a PS5 exclusive. The problem with this leak is that it was initially riding off the notoriety of the original user that released info about Elden Ring, Sekiro, and Diracine through Reddit DMs that were screenshot years ago. For clarity's sake, in case you saw this and didn't find out the resolution, the user, E_0 on Reddit, that originally shared those leaks and screenshots from years ago, confirms they did not post that 4chan thread. So if you've recently heard about this rumored PS5 exclusive, consider this debunked for the time being. It doesn't mean something isn't coming, but this also isn't what would tell us that there is something. Next up, we have a rumored Horizon VR title. The development studio Firesprite has been rumored to be working on a Horizon VR spinoff, and this is the same team that worked on games like the Persistence VR, Air Force Special Ops, and they even aided in the development of the Playroom VR. So if it wasn't obvious, this is a studio deep into virtual reality development, and we all know that Sony has a new headset coming, which is allegedly aiming to launch for a holiday 2022 release. That was a recent Bloomberg report that we also went over, but we also see that this team has a close relationship with Sony working on the Playroom. And these rumors, they originate from job listings where a few of them popped up in 2018 and then again this year, where they would describe their next project as being based on a, and I quote here, globally recognized multi-million selling action RPG and create a full-form PlayStation VR game. This doesn't leave much to the imagination. Based on the description, it's implied that we might be looking at Horizon getting some kind of VR spin-off title, and this would line up with the idea that Sony would preferably want to use PlayStation IP for the headset, of course. Why wouldn't they? But they don't exactly want to tie up first-party developers with VR work. And sure, a case could be made here that certain first-party teams can continue doing VR stuff or start doing VR stuff, like say, London Studio was doing VR stuff on PS4, but we're going to talk later about how that might not be the case anymore. And then for Insomniac, before they were acquired, they were doing VR stuff. But, for a team like that, you don't want to tie them up with VR where it's going to be low volume in terms of the software that they move when obviously they're working on IP right now, which are moving 10, 15, 20 million plus units, and even Ratchet & Clank where that's more low volume. It's going to do much more than, say, a purpose-built VR game for the next generation PSVR headset. So if you're going to leverage PlayStation IP, it would be best to contract that out to VR developers, and it seems like that might be the case for what's going on here, where, again, that job description is kind of a giveaway. It doesn't seem like there's many other PlayStation IP that fit that description, so it seems like that game might be coming with the next headset that we see. Now, moving on to the big one here, it's the Silent Hill rumor that we've been following for such a long time, which we can now also bring in this Blue Box Game Studios situation, and we'll cover this very quickly, of course. Last Friday on LTPS, we kind of ran through that rabbit hole to discuss why the internet is theorizing that Blue Box Game Studios is some sort of hidden Silent Hill Kojima-type project. As of right now, they actually missed their launch date for that PS5 trailer app, so essentially that trailer application is delayed to June 25th, which once it comes out on June 25th, it still won't actually include a trailer of some kind. Mark Delaney, a contributor to GameSpot and also Games Radar, independently did some digging and talked with the studio directly to confirm it's not Silent Hill or Kojima. Now, if you're not going to believe until you see the actual project, we'll just wait until all that comes out. I mean, I was never really sold on the whole thing to begin with. I just felt like the whole thing in particular was fishy in terms of it not being your typical run-of-the-mill smaller team, but we'll see how that pans out. But for right now, at least, there are still plenty of rumors to go over when it comes to the Silent Hill situation, of course, because this is something where we've got a lot. So basically, January 20th, we saw Aesthetic Gamer tweet out about 2 games being in the works, one that would be episodic, the other being a reboot, but essentially the Silent Hill franchise would make a return. Aesthetic Gamer, same deal here, where it's just somebody who's gotten things correct, some things wrong. But on the same day, the website Reliant Horror then corroborated this as well, saying that this is essentially what they've also heard. Later that year in March, Reliant Horror again posted another article claiming they had an additional source stating that the franchise was indeed coming back with Sony's involvement and that Masahiro Ito would be attached to the project. They also claim that Kiichiro Toyama, the director and writer on previous entries, and Akira Yamaoka, composer for most of the franchise, would be returning. SIE Japan Studio, with members from Team Siren, would be developing in some capacity. Reliant Horror then states a second Silent Hill title is being sorted out, which would be a resurrection of Silent Hills, with Sony attempting to mediate the relationship between Kojima and Konami. Reliant Horror ran with this piece, having 2 separate sources with no relation to each other being able to confirm these details. Apparently, this title would also make use of the next-gen PSVR headset, and that Sony was pitching the game to Kojima as a telltale, supermassive, narrative-driven style game with full creative freedom. Though they do clarify this title wasn't in development at the time, whereas the first one they mentioned was. A few weeks later, though, Konami responded to the rumors saying they weren't true at all. May 2020, Aesthetic Gamer on Twitter mentions Konami has been shopping around the Silent Hill IP to different developers since 2018. Apparently 2 games are being pitched, one episodic, the other a reboot. So again, kind of the same deal here. We're picking up on that there's 2 games in development, or they're trying to pitch 2 games in some way, shape, or form. Apparently, Sony would be involved on the reboot, with Japan Studios developing and Kiichiro Toyama directing. And we all know what happened here. Japan Studios was heavily restructured, so it's not quite what we know nowadays. Technically, XDev is now a global operation, so it's not like external development doesn't exist in Japan, but it's not necessarily Japan Studios anymore. They were restructured around Team Asobi. And for Toyama, we know that he actually left Sony to form his own studio, Bokeh Game Studios, and it sounds as though he's not really involved whatsoever in this project at all, because he wants to get away from, big publishers and things like that. In February of this year, 2021, Akira Yamaoka did an interview with AllHub, and when he was asked about what he's working on next, he said, and I quote here, "You'll probably hear something this summer to be announced, and I think it's the one that you're hoping to hear about." The interview was then pulled, and then Konami denied they were the ones to have pulled it. In the same month, it was also being reported from Bob Vids and Voidburger on the Great Debate YouTube channel that Bloober Team have secured the contract to work on a new Silent Hill title if they could prove the medium was profitable. On the flip side, Video Games Chronicle reported that while they have no source on the Bloober Team project, they do have one claiming a Silent Hill game is in the hands of a prominent Japanese developer, and that's it. That was in February. Today, we've seen Konami revive Silent Hill's social media channels, license DLC tie-ins, and begin selling merch. So, this is something where when you hear everything, something is afoot. You've got way too many separate sources all saying that they've heard something, and it all sounds relatively similar, that they're pitching two projects, that they're shopping it around. But clearly the word that they're hearing, at one point Sony's involved in both of them, now they're only involved in one, now they might not be involved in either of them. Of course, we also had the Blue Box situation that's still playing out as we talk about this, and there are still some people that think Silent Hill's not coming back in any sort of meaningful way. But clearly, if you do look at what we've seen up to this point, and also Konami getting, being aware of this IP that they've had on the back burner for, 8 years now, 9 years now? The IP's been pretty dormant for quite a while now at this point. So why the revival? Why the renewed interest? And of course, Konami was even very forward about this, saying the franchise is not dead and they're exploring opportunities. Of course, they've said that much on the topic at hand. So, it really was something where I think a lot of this got out way too soon. We're talking about murmurings of, again, them shopping around the IP in 2018. And if they didn't secure some contracts up until 2019 or 2020, and then the pandemic hits, that's going to, push things out even further. We still have no idea what this thing is really going to look like by the time we have a public reveal of one or both of these things. It also seems as though one of these was further behind than the other by a significant amount of time, and they're both two different directions, with one of them being episodic and kind of more cinematic driven, and one of them being a more formal reboot of the entire franchise, where it would be traditional Silent Hill, or at least that's what you would expect. But we just have to be patient on this one, right? But there is a lot to the Silent Hill thing that, if you haven't been keeping up, that's pretty much all of it laid out in front of you. For our next rumor, we can walk into this one with a little more confidence based off of what we know and how we know it, but it's Naughty Dog and their two rumored games, and really it's 3 here in total, but we're not doing a full portfolio update. Of course, they have a full-scale project that is years away, but the most straightforward rumory-based one would be Factions. It's just a matter of we don't necessarily know what this will look like entirely, so while we know that Factions is coming in some way, shape, or form, a spin-off Last of Us multiplayer mode, which was supposed to be a part of Last of Us Part 2. It seems as though this might be a more full-scale, full-blown Factions, which could maybe even command its own price tag of, $50, $60. We have no idea how they're going to choose to monetize this particular project, but we do have job listings where it appears as though this game is much bigger than we were led to believe, which you can kind of already surmise that just off of how long it's taken for them to even say anything about it, which up to this point wasn't really much. But there's also the Last of Us remake, so the remake of the 2013 game, and this is one where a lot of people do know about this because it was highly publicized from Jason Schreier's Bloomberg article, where it went into detail and it was kind of an expose on what was going on behind the scenes for Naughty Dog, Visual Arts Service Group, but also Bend Studio. This is where people learned about the Days Gone 2 pitch getting denied, but we also learned that for the Visual Arts Service Group, which is Sony's cinematic and performance capture group, there was a small team that was being formed there to try try and work on their own project from the ground up, right? But initially their idea was, let's do a remaster, or a remake rather, right? Something a little easier to handle before they eventually might be able to work their way to their own original IP themselves. So their idea was, let's start with Uncharted 1, but then they realized Uncharted 1 was going to take too much in terms of retooling the gameplay to get it up to modern standards, so they said, okay, what about The Last of Us? It's a little bit more recent. And allegedly, the newly appointed PlayStation Studios head Herman Hulst had reviewed this project and thought, okay, this costs a lot. Why is it costing this much? And so it seems like the game was put on a probationary period up until at some point hands were starting to exchange between the small visual arts service group team working on this game as their own to then it getting shifted to Naughty Dog, because I guess the idea there was if somebody's going to remake The Last of Us, it should be the folks over at Naughty Dog. And so it seems like right now, based on what we know, the game is completely in their hands, and maybe VASG is once again going back to a support team, because they also did that on top of the cinematics and performance capture. So it's kind of an open secret now at this point that while it's not confirmed, we are expecting a Last of Us remake from Naughty Dog, which would look similar to what Part 2 looks like right now, but it would be for PlayStation 5 hardware. Not sure if it would be entirely exclusive, but that's what we know right now. Moving on to London Studios. So this one gets a little bit messy. In recent years, they handled VR projects for PlayStation, but right now they've got job listings that are suggesting they're returning to a traditional 2D but AAA development space, with the game including some kind of multiplayer-like component or at minimum online features. The reason why this is messy is that lately we've seen a lot of trademarks for a Soho engine, a reference being drawn here to London Studio and the former Soho team, which really, that team hasn't been a thing or existed for about 20-something odd years, so the trademark itself, it mentions that it's applicable to a variety of video game software, including virtual reality, which seems natural, but there are other things that are on here, like, for example, hosting online services, which could include things like esports tournaments, driver training, which is a little strange, other video games created by players. There's a wide spread on what this could be used for, which you kind of expect from a trademark, so a lot of people are theorizing what this could mean. When it says Soho engine, there's a tie-in to the old Team Soho, and so people are looking at, okay, maybe the getaway, because the job listings are suggesting that's a normal 2D game, but then you also look at the hosting online services, the VR stuff, and you've got a lot of people hopeful that maybe we'll see a return to PlayStation Home, which I wouldn't hold out for that. I can't see the company returning back to PS Home. It's one of those things where I know people are very vocal about it coming back, but you have to understand that Sony back then didn't even really want to do PlayStation Home, and it was, I mean, that's kind of what the documentary was all about, was how they didn't really want to do it. They didn't know what to do with it to begin with. Their goal for it didn't really pan out how they wanted it to, so while it was profitable and made money, it just wasn't something that they really wanted to put a lot of effort into and stick to. Now, of course, Sony back then is different to where they are now, so you could certainly argue that maybe they want to do something or revisit it or go all in, especially when you add in VR functionality or this cool thing that games as a service are doing where you're putting in these live events for players to witness in real time. And those are certainly really cool things. And I know Sony's trying to be ahead of the curve here with a lot of this stuff. So who knows? But this is where we're getting into more speculation territory instead of the rumors, right? So we only have the job listings and then we're speculating from there. But while we are speaking about job listings, we can also touch on a few other Sony studios before we wrap this one up. So Guerrilla Games, we still know that there's a second team working on a multiplayer project. They hired multiplayer talent. A lot of them are still working there. We've got no indication that that project is shuttered or no longer a thing. Guerrilla Games was always forward about wanting to do two teams at the same time, and for Sony Interactive Entertainment, we know that they've been putting some major dollars up front to reinvest back into their studios, whether that's merger and acquisitions or expanding the teams that they have, and so Guerrilla Games is certainly a part of that. We should be seeing this game at some point. Pixel Opus, new game out of them. That's going to be a collab with Sony Pictures and Unreal Engine 5 based on a job listing we had very recently. That sounds phenomenal, actually. I mean, this is the smallest team out of Sony's lineup, and so there's obviously going to be some investment there, and they're slowly growing. And then at Santa Monica Studio, they've got a new IP going as well. They've been very clear about that, a new AAA unannounced IP, so that'll be exciting to see what comes out of them, but that's probably further out. But again, Sony's been doing a lot of investment, so these aren't necessarily rumors, but it's just something where a lot is coming up, and you would imagine we'll start having rumors for them at some point. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you found it useful. If you haven't yet, please subscribe for the best PlayStation news, reviews, and updates that are here on YouTube. You can also follow me on Twitter at Mystic Ryan, and that is it. I will see you all in my next video. You take it easy.